I am the narrator of this tale, taking your hand and guiding you through centuries long faded, when the sun of the Middle Ages still burned bright, and new empires stirred in the cradle of Europe. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, emperor of the Romans, lord of Christendom, was said to command not only armies and borders, but the very soul of a continent. Yet beyond the grandeur of stone palaces and crowned proclamations, there existed a secret. One that has been buried, rewritten, and nearly erased, but not forgotten. Let me take you back to a time when whispers traveled faster than swords, and shadows clung tightly to the feet of kings. The year was 780, though no one dared date the moment exactly. Charlemagne was moving his court as he often did, never content to root himself in one place, a king always on the march. His empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, but that night, in a quiet valley near Upper Savoy, the emperor found himself oddly restless. This was no restlessness of politics or military strategy, but of something deeper, more human, a hollow echo that had grown louder with each passing year. I learned from the journals of a royal physician and fragments of letters kept hidden in a monastery vault that Charlemagne had begun to suffer from a dream, recurring, suffocating, and always the same. A woman's voice, low and distant, calling him by a name he did not remember giving. She stood at the edge of his consciousness, neither wife nor mistress, neither ghost nor memory. And yet she haunted him. It was on that particular night, during a brief camp along the imperial route, that he first saw her. She was no noble, not a duchess, nor the daughter of any count. She moved silently among the servants, setting up the great pavilion where the emperor would rest. Her hands worked quickly, with purpose, tying ropes and driving stakes with the calm determination of someone who had done this 100 times before. But when Charlemagne passed by, something in her eyes struck him, a defiance, or perhaps recognition. He summoned her, of course. No one refused the emperor. She entered his tent not as a guest but as property, at least that is what the chronicles would have you believe. The truth, as I have come to understand it, is far more complicated. That night something passed between them. Words, perhaps, maybe silence, perhaps only the desperate need to feel something that was not power or war. She did not weep, nor beg. He did not command or conquer. And in the pale glow of the oil lamp, something ancient stirred, something the church would later call sin, and others would whisper of as prophecy. Her name was never recorded. If it was ever known at all, it was carefully scrubbed from history. Some said she was a pagan, a slave from the East. Others claimed she was of Roman blood, the last thread of a fallen line. But to Charlemagne, she became an obsession. The next morning, she was gone. What followed were weeks of silence. He did not speak of her. No one dared ask. But then came the letters, anonymous, coded, sent between abbots and bishops in trembling script. One such letter, now decayed and faded, reads, "He has seen her again, not in body but in sign. A star appeared above the southern sky, and the emperor withdrew. She is the mark of downfall. Here lies the first seed of the conspiracy." Within months, rumors began to spread through the court. Not all were idle. Some claimed Charlemagne had sired a child, illegitimate, unwanted, but born of that single night. A girl, perhaps, or a boy. The stories varied. But the fear remained constant. A rival bloodline, born in secret, whose existence could shatter the delicate myth of divine right. It is true that Charlemagne had many children, both legitimate and otherwise. But this one, if the child ever existed, was different. This one was hidden not out of shame, but out of dread. A child not blessed by church or ceremony, but by something far older and darker. Documents from the Abbey of Saint Gall suggest that certain scribes were ordered to revise genealogical scrolls. A family line abruptly ends, only to be reconnected generations later, under new names and invented titles. Entire entries in the royal lineage were blotted out with ink, or overwritten with foreign scribes' hands. One monk even notes, "We obeyed in silence, but some truths are not meant to sleep." So began the fabrication, a version of Charlemagne that history would accept. The holy warrior, the Christian emperor, the father of Europe. a man above base desire, above scandal. But the truth is never so clean. I have reason to believe that this woman, this shadow bride, did not disappear forever, that she re-emerged years later under another name in the court of a rival kingdom. Her presence, recorded vaguely in the margins of a chronicler's memoir, hints at her power. She spoke Latin. She knew the movements of the Frankish army. And most importantly, she had a child with her. Whether this child lived, or was silenced like the records, remains uncertain. But as we peel back the falsehoods laid over centuries, we begin to see a picture that does not match the clean portraits hung in churches and courts. We see a man haunted not by enemies, but by choices, by what he allowed to exist and what he had to bury. And so, we arrive at the edge of revelation. A secret so carefully hidden it required 1,000 hands to suppress. Yet like all great secrets, it waits to be found. I will stop here, for now. But if you wish to continue, if your curiosity outweighs your comfort, then I shall tell you what came next, the unraveling of the conspiracy, and the return of the blood once thought erased. Years passed. Charlemagne's empire expanded. His name was sung in every cathedral from Toulouse to Cologne. But beneath the glory and the chants, a quiet tremor stirred, like something buried alive, scratching faintly beneath the marble of his legacy. You must understand, by the time the emperor founded the Palatine Chapel in Aachen, he was no longer merely a ruler, he was a symbol. A holy patriarch, elevated by the Pope himself, seen by many as a new Constantine. But symbols are dangerous things. They must be flawless, impeccable. And the past has a way of staining the edges, no matter how brightly the future is painted. Aachen was to be his Rome, a city of eternal presence, constructed not just for worship, but for memory. Yet beneath the chapel, under the layers of polished stone and imperial mosaics, lay something never meant to be found, a hidden chamber. No record of it exists in the official blueprints preserved by Carolingian architects. Its very location was whispered only among a few monks, sworn to oaths that died with them. I first learned of this chamber through the Codex Aeternus, a fragmented manuscript housed secretly in a minor monastery deep in the Ardennes. Bound in leather darkened by smoke, the Codex tells of a crypt of silence beneath the chapel, sealed with lead and prayer, where something precious was kept, or rather someone. The monk who wrote the Codex, a man named Brother Engelbert, claimed to have been assigned to clean the lower foundations of the chapel during its construction. He speaks of a procession silent, torchlit, guarded not by soldiers, but by hooded clerics whose Latin chants never ceased. And at the center of the procession, a woman veiled, her wrists bound not by chains, but by strands of woven gold. She was placed into the chamber, alone. No tomb, no grave. She was alive. Brother Engelbert was told she was a heretic, a threat to the empire, but his words betray his doubt. He describes her beauty in poetic terms. Her presence was not earthly, nor celestial, but something in between, a storm held in stillness. He returned years later to find the chamber sealed, silent, empty. Who was she? I know it was the same woman. The servant girl who had vanished the morning after her encounter with Charlemagne. She had not fled. She had been taken. Why? Because of what she carried. You see, the greatest fear of any empire is not invasion, but illegitimacy. If a child had truly been born from their union, outside the sanctity of marriage, outside the blessing of the church, then the divine image of Charlemagne as God's chosen ruler would crack. A single, hidden heir could unravel everything. The chamber beneath Aachen was not a prison. It was a womb of silence, designed to erase. But erasure requires more than walls. It requires complicity. This is where the conspiracy reveals its second layer. Among Charlemagne's closest advisors was a man named Alcuin of York, a scholar, a theologian, a devout man of learning. He has long been praised for helping Charlemagne shape the Carolingian Renaissance. But letters I uncovered, now kept in the secret archive of a Bavarian priory, reveal a different Alcuin. In one letter to Bishop Arno of Salzburg, he writes, "The emperor's will is not to be questioned. though the burden of his past weighs heavier than the crown of iron. And later, more cryptically, the star has fallen beneath the chapel. Let no eye seek its light. The star. Again, the same symbol. A reference, perhaps, to the woman, or her child. Because there was a child. There must have been. Another document, and signed but attributed to a court scribe, details the sudden transfer of an infant, an unnamed boy, to a monastery near Tours. He is to be raised without title, without tongue. Let him read the scriptures but not the laws. No further mention of the boy exists in public record. But monks do not burn everything. The Liber Obscura, a forbidden volume kept locked for centuries beneath Monte Cassino, describes a visitor to the monastery. Tall, dark-haired, with piercing eyes. He came seeking his origin. He claimed to bear a mark, a scar upon his palm, said to match a sigil carved into the wall of the Ardennes crypt. The monks refused him entry. Days later, the monastery burned. The question now becomes unavoidable. Who was this man? Some believe he became a wanderer, preaching in strange dialects across the Rhine. Others say he was captured and executed under another name, buried in an unmarked grave. But there are those who claim that he lived, and that his descendants walk among us still, their blood carrying the forbidden thread of empire. If true, then Charlemagne's secret was not buried. It was planted. And this would explain the odd interventions of later kings, why certain genealogies are suspiciously incomplete, why some names appear in royal documents only to vanish without trace. It would explain the quiet killings, the closed monasteries, the inexplicable silences in the otherwise meticulously recorded chronicles of the Carolingian era. The hidden chamber beneath Aachen, the veiled woman imprisoned in silence, the child erased and displaced. These are not isolated incidents. They form the architecture of a lie so vast it had to be built in stone, ritual, and time. I traveled to Aachen myself. I walked the cold marble of the chapel, stood beneath the octagonal dome, and felt the centuries pressing down. The air trembles there, like a whisper trapped between echoes. Tourists see only the gold, the glory. But I saw the absence, the place where truth once was. They have tried to erase her, but stone remembers. And so, dear listener, we stand at the edge of revelation once more. The woman in gold, the child in hiding, the scholar who helped conceal it all. We have opened the chamber, but we have not yet stepped inside. If you are prepared, we will enter in part 3, where the bloodline awakens, and the past begins to bleed into the present. The story, up to now, has been buried beneath cathedrals, masked by liturgy, and drowned in incense and song. But as I delved deeper into the arcane corners of Europe's forgotten libraries, I began to uncover a pattern, scraps of truth threaded together like veins beneath skin, each piece fragile, fragmented, easily dismissed. But when seen together, they formed a terrible clarity. The bloodline of Charlemagne did not end with the heirs we were told of. It splintered, silently, defiantly. There is a village in the Black Forest, unnamed in any modern registry. The locals call it Altraburg, though even that name has changed a dozen times over the centuries. It appears in no recent maps, but in one 10th century Latin charter, I found reference to a sanctum refugitum, a holy refuge where the line was kept pure in silence. That phrase alone was enough to drive me into obsession. The line. I traveled there. I tell you now, this village should not exist. The roads bend away from it as if repelled. The forest encroaches like a sentinel. I found no signs of modern life, no wires, no lights. Only a ring of crumbling stone structures and a chapel at the center, blackened by time. An old man greeted me. His face was lined like tree bark, his German thick with ancient Swabian cadence. He called me by name before I had spoken it. I asked him how. He said, "Because you have come to remember. In that village, memory is a curse carried by blood." I was taken to the chapel. Inside, beneath the altar, there was a trapdoor of weathered oak. It creaked open to reveal a stairway spiraling down into the earth. The walls were covered in carvings, neither Latin nor German, but a mixture of runes and pre-Carolingian symbology. At the center of the underground chamber stood a stone pedestal. Upon it, a book, the Codex Nocturnus. It is not a gospel. It is not history. It is confession. Written in a trembling hand, page after page details the lineage of a child, born not to a queen, but to the woman of gold, beneath the imperial eye of Charlemagne. The boy was spirited away, raised by monks who believed his blood would someday be the key to a rebirth of true divine kingship. They called him Iustius, the justified, but others called him something else, the heir in shadow. According to the Codex, Iustius was more than a symbol. He was trained to rule, taught the politics of Rome, the languages of the East, and the rituals of the old Frankish kings. Yet he was never crowned. His existence was denied by every court, every scroll. Why? Because he stood as proof that the empire was built on a lie. Iustius challenged Charlemagne, not directly but ideologically. He claimed that kingship without consent, without the people, was heresy in disguise. He began writing treatises, secretly, smuggled through monasteries. They were signed with a single sigil, a sun eclipsed. The church declared it heresy. Copies were burned. Monks were executed. But the ideas spread. It was the first seed of resistance, the first crack in the illusion of Holy Empire. I followed the trail of Iustius's writings to an abandoned abbey near Lyon. There, beneath the shattered mosaic of a forgotten saint, I uncovered a reliquary. Inside a ring, not gold, iron, etched with the same sun eclipse sigil. It is said that Iustius never died, that his descendants continued the bloodline, hiding among the peasantry, among the rebels, among the scholars who questioned too much. It is said that they surface every few generations, not with swords, but with truths. If you have ever wondered why certain thinkers vanish mysteriously, why revolutionaries die in cells, why books are banned without explanation, then you have glimpsed the hidden war. Because the empire never truly ended. It simply went underground. And the blood of Charlemagne, untainted, unrecognized, still flows. One descendant appears in the court records of Frederick Barbarossa, but only briefly. Another surfaces as an advisor to the Medici, before being accused of sorcery and disappearing. There are rumors that even during the Enlightenment, a man claiming descent from Iustius challenged papal authority with a treatise so precise, so damning, it was buried by 3 separate inquisitions. Their blood is everywhere and nowhere. But the conspiracy runs deeper. The Vatican archives, those sealed behind 30-foot walls, guarded not just by men, but by centuries of silence, contain references to Ex Libris Sanguinis, the Book of Blood. It is said to contain the full genealogical descent of the shadow bloodline, annotated, tracked, and suppressed. Only 3 people alive are rumored to have seen it. One died in a car crash. Another was found drowned in the Tiber. The third vanished during a diplomatic visit to Belgium. The church does not fear sin. It fears legacy. Because if even one living person today could prove their descent from Charlemagne through the Forbidden Union, the legitimacy of over 1,000 years of Christian monarchy could be questioned. And that they will never allow. I left Altenburg with nothing in my hands, but everything in my mind. The old man told me one last thing before I left. She never died. I asked him what he meant. She, the woman, the mother. They say she was not of this world, that she came to remind the king of his humanity. And when he buried her, he buried that part of himself. I do not know if I believe him, but I have seen too much to dismiss it. Now, dear listener, the hour grows late, but our story is not done. They say all blood dries eventually, that memory fades, that stone crumbles, that history forgets. But I have come to believe something else entirely, that the blood of empire does not disappear, it simply learns to hide. It survives not in crowns or cathedrals, but in whispers, in names misspelled, in documents unsigned. And sometimes, when the silence can no longer contain it, it returns. This is where our story breaks through time. It began with a letter. An anonymous package arrived at my door. No return address. Only a wax seal stamped with a sun eclipsed, the mark of Iustius. Inside, photographs. A fragment of parchment. a lock of hair, and a name, Leon de Stavelot. I followed the trail to Belgium, to a monastery long since converted into a private residence. There I met him. Leon was a man in his late 30s, quiet, methodical, with eyes like faded storm glass. He did not speak at first. Instead, he handed me a folder thin, aged, bound in thread. Inside was the truth. His bloodline. It began with an illegitimate birth in the early 1500s, an orphan left at the gates of a monastic scriptorium, bearing a ring identical to the one I had seen beneath Lion. His descendants appeared in secret logs, not family trees. They moved from library to library, city to city. They were never noble. That was the point. The bloodline hid by abandoning the throne. But it never forgot. One ancestor was executed during the French Revolution, not as an aristocrat, but as a keeper of forbidden lineage. Another fled to Prussia, working as a clerk in the court of Frederick William IV. Each generation moved closer to silence until Leon. He was not a historian. He was a geneticist, and he had questions. As a child, he'd been told by his grandmother that his bones remembered things. She died before he could ask more. But the dream returned, night after night, of a woman bound in gold, standing beneath a burning star. He didn't understand. Not until he found the ring. Then came the DNA. With quiet precision, Leon began cross-referencing his genome with royal archives, using unauthorized samples and buried data. What he found defied explanation. A genetic signature consistent with what has been reconstructed from Charlemagne's known descendants, but with key mutations absent in every known lineage. His blood was clean, ancient, undiluted, and then the emails began. Warnings, death threats, invitations from secret societies, from heritage institutes in Rome, in Vienna, in Krakow. They wanted access to his DNA, to his body, to his silence. But Leon had made a decision. He would not run. Instead, he began assembling the Crimson Archive, a digital vault of every document, relic, and sample tied to the hidden bloodline. He traced not only his ancestry but those of others like him. Fragments of the same secret scattered across Europe. A woman in Calabria with a birthmark identical to the imperial seal. A blind child in Poland who recited old Frankish hymns without ever being taught. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. The hidden bloodline had not only survived. It had multiplied. The church knew. Governments knew. Monarchies too. And they were afraid, not of power being taken, but of truth being revealed. Because if Leon's claim could be verified publicly, it would not only challenge the legitimacy of centuries of European rule, it would expose an entire fabricated history. The Holy Roman Empire, the divine right of kings, the sacred union of church and crown, it would all unravel. The real heir had never worn a crown. The real empire had lived in silence. And that brings us to now. Leon asked me a question before I left his home. He said, "If I come forward, if I reveal this to the world, what happens next?" I told him the truth. The world would reject him, call him a fraud, a lunatic, an enemy of tradition. Some would seek to destroy him, others to control him. But the truth would survive. Not because of belief, but because it had waited long enough. And then, he said the words I never forgot. "I don't want a throne. I want the lie to end." That night, I walked alone through the woods near his home. The air was still. In the silence, I heard something. Not words, not footsteps, but a deep rhythm, like breath under the earth. The pulse of the buried past. It is always there, you see, waiting to be heard. And now you have heard it. Charlemagne's empire was not built solely on conquest or law or divine favor. It was built on silence, on omission, on the careful murder of inconvenient truth. That truth lives still, in names unspoken, in children born out of record, in stone chambers beneath golden chapels. Leon lives in hiding now, or perhaps he has died. I do not know, but the archive he built remains. His contents are spreading, quietly, irreversibly. And so, I ask you, dear listener, when the heir returns, not with armies but with proof, will you listen? Will you believe? Will you remember? Because this is not a story they tried to erase. It is a story they still are. End.